Good evening, I'm DK Ronster. Welcome back to the TTT News. In a look at some of the marginal seats, we started off with Barataria Sound 1, and Dr. Winford James returns to point out some factors that we should be mindful of when discussing Moruga Tableland heading into this election. Good evening, Dr. James.
Good evening, DK, and good evening to your viewer and listenership.
And we started, as we did on Barataria Sound 1, we will start on Moruga Tableland. What are some of your thoughts on the constituency?
Well, there are one or two things that we have to pay attention to at the outset. First of all, it's a marginal seat. The PNM hold the seat at this time, and they hold it by a slim majority. Can't quite remember what the majority is, but I think it's 2.5 something, but it's less than 10. It's under 10% of the majority held by, it's less than 10% of the vote, sorry. The majority that, what's his name, Lovell Francis, sorry, holds is 2.5%, I think it is. And when Clifton Dakota, I think it was, held the seat, the margin of difference, the majority was still very small. It's only in 2010 when we had the People's Partnership and a coalition of the opposition forces that we had that majority going up to 14%. And the reason for that, as I said, is the fact that the opposition forces combined. But it has been a marginal seat for some time, certainly in 2015 and in 2007.
Now, what are some of the reasons that we may have so many candidates? Now, you talk about the slimmest of margins, but there are literally 5 candidates vying for the seat. There's Winston Peters and Michelle Benjamin for the PNM and UNC, respectively. Valentine Alvarez for the Democratic Party of Trinidad and Tobago. Larry Sankar with the Trinidad Humanity Campaign, and Thomas Sotillo, who I believe is independent. Now, is the margin the only reason that might lead to such a raft of people vying for a specific seat?
No, the margin does not explain it. The margin only indicates that the support for one party or the other is not great. In fact, what the figures suggest is that either party may win. With respect to the question as to why that is so, then we are entering into history and sociology, and we are entering into the demographics of a population. And I want to tell you that the poll that was done within that constituency by HHB doesn't answer that question for us. What we can say is that that constituency, Moruga Tableland, is not an ethnic monolith in terms of its population, so far as I can see as I drive through that particular constituency. There is no ethnic group that dominates in terms of numbers, dominates that particular constituency. You have a lot of Afros and you have a lot of Indos, and you have the mixed group as well, which are the 3 biggest groups that constitute the constituency. So, and even though the voter turnout is large, what I'm saying here is you don't have the same kind of result that you have for, let's say, a place like Siparia, or a place like Diego Martin West, or a place like Oro Pooch, or a place like, one of those PNM seats along the corridor. You don't have any big gaps between one candidate and the other. But it's difficult to explain that without the necessary studies having been done, without a census that is up to date in terms of how population is divided among the different ethnic groups that live in that constituency.
I like the fact that you speak about
Just
history.
wanted to say another thing here.
Please, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say something else. The poll that was done by HHB in that constituency gives the PNM the edge. But the pollster was quick to point out that it's it's a statistical tie. There's nothing to shout about, the PNM to shout about, although they could probably sense that they are still with their nose ahead in the race. But they depending on how the undecided voters vote, and depending on how the small ethnic groups vote, the thing can go in any direction. But I suspect that at this time, PNM is favored based on the polls, which is the best science that we have so far.
But I will say that there are more than one person who has said that polls, they give good indications, but at the same time, polls mean nothing. Votes are the things that matter. But you spoke...
Oh, that's not true at all. That can't be true.
Correct me,
polls
please.
Must mean something. Why? Because they are the tools of science that tells us beforehand what people are likely to do, who the people are, the parties and the individuals they favor. Yes, there is nothing that we have in human experience in Trinidad and Tobago that is better than a poll to indicate what the current circumstances are and how, in fact, those circumstances would be played out in relation to a winner. It doesn't mean that the polls will always be right. And that is why pollsters very often shy away from predicting, because they know that after their poll, since a poll is a snapshot in time, after the poll that has been done, which is now historical, other things might happen, which they could not take into consideration. People may even change their minds. The undecided group might get a little smaller. But it is wrong to say, it is not particularly smart to say that they mean nothing, it's votes. Votes matter, but we are not talking about votes as a group of indicators. We are talking about what meaning or what meanings lie in the votes that we are seeing in terms of a poll. Obviously, people will have to vote, but to say that polls mean nothing, vote means everything, does not help us to understand anything, Mr. Ruston.
So should we qualify that misstatement to distill a meaning from it, to say like the snapshot of polls should not lull individuals into a sense of false complacency?
Well, I don't know if it's individuals here as much as it's parties, because it's we have come to expect parties to dominate our governance experience. Hardly any individuals do. So I don't know if it's a mistake as a misstatement as much as it is an insufficient judgment of how things work. Trinidad and Tobago has to understand that if we are going to get more and more modern in the way we conduct our elections, part of what we need to do as a matter of course is to develop capacity to explain the way people feel about the political parties as a going concern. Of course, it's a cost to the business and we are a small nation. But that's one of the tools of the social sciences to indicate. We can't just dismiss those polls out of hand, because there is nothing else that takes the place of polls. Individual snapshots, they are important, I suppose, to the individuals themselves, but they cannot explain general trends or general indications. Far from it, sorry.
And this is one of the reasons that I genuinely appreciate speaking with you, Dr. James. We continue this conversation when we return. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're speaking with Dr. Winford James about the marginal constituency of Moruga Tableland. Now, Dr. James, I want to speak specifically about Winston Gypsy Peters for a moment, please. Because he's the person, as a politician, who has had the most visible career, some might say. Now, do you ever really count him out? I wanted us to take a look at his numbers in Mayaro and see some of the things that he did. So I guess that graphic will come up. But looking at 2002, 2007, and 2002, 2007, and the work that he did, and the margins really increased. So from something like 2 to a little higher than that to then almost 21. I mean, the first time. So the first time we looked at it, the constituency was Ottawa Mayaro, but then you have Mayaro twice.
Right. Right. And there we have it right now.
Yes, sir.
2010 we can easily understand. 2007 is the more interesting statistic, and he won. The reason why I'm saying 2010 is not as is that it is very clear from an analysis of the way people are voting in this country that when the opposition forces come together, they beat the PNF. And that's what has happened there, and that is what has sent Gypsy's figures up. You seem to be suggesting that some people think that the reason why there is a repetition of support for Gypsy is that he did something in his own personal capacity. And while it cannot be doubted that individual candidates have their own importance and they bring certain advantages to the table, while that is true, we cannot disaggregate to say that under the UNC, while Gypsy was in Mayaro, the things that are done in Mayaro are as a result of his intervention. It's difficult to say that because we have the notion of collective responsibility. We have the notion of the distribution of financial resources, which is critically the key thing here, to particular constituencies to improve infrastructure and so on. Whether we can say that Gypsy was responsible for any progress that we can see and that he can talk about and identify in Mayaro is quite a different story. Nobody knows what individuals do.
So I'm not trying to ascribe the work done specifically to him, but I'm wondering if there may be any carryover, because someone may think that at this time perception may be a little more, because even looking at the fact that agriculture and fishing would be two mainstays in the constituency, and then we look at the fact that there's the first agro-processing and light industrial park, there was a sud-turning for the Grand Chemin fishing facility. Do you see those kind of things having any impact on undecideds in a marginal constituency?
Yes. I can agree to that easily. It is the things that have been done. It is the progress that has been made. It is the new developments. It is activities that have improved people's lives and expanded their sense of the worthwhileness of voting. Those things affect people. What we were talking about, or at least what I was talking about here, is the assignment of responsibility for the progress to a particular individual. But certainly those things do. Some, of course, are seen as opportunistic. If you in the year or in the month of elections, if you turn the sod for something, obviously people are going to see that as opportunity. Some people are going to see that as opportunistic right there in front of your face, because turning the sod does not mean that the structure for which it is being turned will in fact be built. And we have many instances in this country in which the sod has been turned, but the building has not materialized. So, but this is not to downplay too much the importance of somebody like Gypsy. He's part of the PNM now, as he was part of the UNC and the People's Partnership, and his voice was an important one. And one can surmise that because of his popularity across the country and beyond Trinidad and Tobago into the wider Caribbean and perhaps even beyond that, Gypsy is not a small individual at all. We can, with some justification, say he may have been responsible. What I am querying is whether we can definitely say so. If we can, we must be able to do some research into what he claims as his victories, as his accomplishments, and we should subject those claims to the scrutiny of fact-checking and, of course, to standards by which we can evaluate the performance of a parliamentarian.
Looking at the fact that you don't see an ethnic monolith in this constituency, the fact that this was actually, we were not able to go as far back as we did to look at numbers as we were able to do with Barataria San Juan, which we were able to trace back as far as 1986. But that, to me, in and of itself is interesting. Breaking that constituency or moving from Princestown South to Tableland, to Moruga Tableland, what are some of the factors that are going on there?
But I don't quite remember. You know, every election season, the EBC talks about adjustment because there are certain basic provisions that must be met, right? And I really do not have enough information to disagree with the EBC. Expect them to do their with adjusting the boundaries if they are disparate adjacent constituencies, which they have done under every government so far as I know. With respect to other matters, like, you know, what table and how what affects the size of the constituency, I must say that there is no indication, first of all, that that is the case. I don't expect the EBC to get political in that sense. The EBC has to deal with physical space and the numbers that we are indicating that we will confine to those physical spaces so that there is some kind of parity between one constituency and another. But we could not lay at the EBC's door a concern for other matters. Those are matters for the politician, which, of course, are being played out now on the platforms.
And speaking of platforms, we are looking to sharing this platform once more. That is tomorrow, please God, when we will be discussing Shogunas East. So we look forward to that with you, Dr. James, Winford James. And
well, that's the most interesting one.
Well, we saved it for last.
That's Shogunas East. Okay.
All right, thank you so much. This has been Winford James, Dr. Winford James, with us sharing this time. On behalf of the entire news team, I'm DK Roster. Thank you for joining us. Have a good night.